If you've ever wondered what it was like to be a Delta operator and walk a mile in his shoes in 1980, then this video is for you. Welcome back to part 2. We're here with Phil Hanson, retired Sergeant Major from Delta Force, and he has got a bunch of his equipment that he used actually on Operation Eagle Claw that he's volunteered his time and his home to us to go through it and give us an inside look of the state of the art, what these guys use in 1980, and it is fascinating. Phil, take us through this stuff.
So, as in your first video that you already posted online, we all carried those that were going to handle hostages or maybe come in contact. We carried these yellow sweatbands, and the sweatbands had luminous tape on them. So you, in the darkness, you could see them. My luminous tape has come off of that sweatband, just a regular tennis sweatband. We had those. And then, like your first one, got 100-mile-an-hour tape around my dog tags, which were around my neck, just to silence them, to keep them quiet.
A question on these: were you going to put these on their heads? Or
yes,
on
their heads.
On their heads.
On their heads to identify them and
keep them in the herd.
Yeah, keep them in the herd, and you could, from a distance, glance and say, okay, that's a group of hostages.
Cool.
Next thing that I have is, a lot of guys wore Levi's. I actually wore a black pair of pants. I had a pair of pants, and they were good pants. They kind of were a stretch pants, so if I had to climb over a wall or do something, they would, they weren't going to rip out or do something else with the pants. These are the actual pants that I wore on the mission. Everybody was. Did you have a question?
Did you have any other modifications to these? Or
No. They were, and I may have used the pockets for some gear or things I needed. Okay. This is actually a Navy watch sweater. Men's, 100% wool. We were all issued these. It was going to be cold in the desert. This was part of our uniform. Underneath this, I don't have it here today, but underneath this I had a dress Army poplin shirt that was wore under the dress greens at the time. And it was under here, so should you have to E&E or something, I could always take the collars out and put it out on the outside, and it looked like you had a nice black sweater on. Sweater was long enough then, so if I had to ditch my field jacket, I could pull the sweater down and maybe cover up my gun and a couple other things that would be on my belt. The belt I wore was rigger made.
Now there are going to be mines exploding all over the internet.
On this. This was rigger made, and it was double thickness of nylon here, just because that's the side I carried my guns on. And so we had this a little bit extra stiffener on that side. But this was the belt that went with there, and the stitching that went with it, and
very cool.
But and this at one time, it is faded, had been dyed with a black shoe dye, but it has kind of all wore off on that.
So this was the standard green webbing.
Yeah, you go over there and they'd cut one to length and sew it up for you, and you would have your green belt. I continued to use this the whole time I was in there. We didn't have all the fancy lights that we had that are available now. The Penlight, this was the Penlight that we carried, U.S. Army government issue. It has a red lens in it. Hold on, let's...
This is the same one that we found out last year the Sante Raiders carried.
Come on. Well, why aren't we working? And it had a white light, and it has a red light. Could be the batteries are bad. You could hang it around your neck, adjust it. I actually carried mine in a coat pocket and then wrapped this around a button, so I wouldn't lose it. I had too much. I didn't want too much shit hanging around my neck. Yeah. Excuse my French. Other thing I carried was my Navy Kabar. This has been around the world numerous times with me. U.S. Navy. I'm going to turn it back up so you can see. But you can see this. In fact, you and I looked at a couple pictures, and you can see some other people carrying these. But yes, I carried this. I'm now using a different sheath because this over the years has started to fall apart. That was on my belt. Additionally, on my belt, in case I had to ditch my jacket, was a Bianchi 45 double magazine pouch for 45 magazines. In case I had to ditch that, I had some place to carry magazines.
And this was again a tan one that you guys dyed.
Yeah, we dyed that black. This was tan and dyed black. You know, we almost dyed everything black. This is an old 45 Bianchi holster.
Now this is cool as hell.
And
you showed me what you did here.
Yeah, and so normally we carried this on our assault belt. It would carry, and we learned to draw from this and do all this and hit the snap as we'd go for the gun. And we did these. But what we did for this mission, because the jacket was so heavy, you couldn't sweep the jacket around to get to your pistol. So mine and a couple others were modified, and going in, we would have it here, but in Desert 2 or at our holding area, rally point, we would lower this down, and what we ended up doing is these straps would be run back through themselves, like so, and then this would be the first elastic use of
drop leg holster.
A drop leg holster. And
get it up underneath your
it would hang right below
jacket.
my field jacket. So I had my 40. If I had to transition or do something else, my 45 was right there to where I could get to it. But just for while we were going to go do the assault and do the mission, it was going to be there. The rest of the time, it's going to be up here. But that was another modification that we used, and that was also on the belt. We all carried some camouflage material. Most of the camouflage material was used for when we were going to be in Desert 2. Some of us, you can see in some of the old pictures, people took their camouflage material, wrapped their gun in it, and to keep the sand and dust and other things out of it. The old chocolate chip, I actually took a piece of mine, made a small square, ran 550 cord, weaved it in and out through there, and we all had a spare bottle for Desert 2 of milk jug full of water, because we knew we were going to need at least a gallon of water. So we all had a rinsed out milk jug and brought it in. As you saw in your previous one, Navy watch cap.
Looks like the Navy was well represented.
Yeah, Navy was real represented. If we could just get their helicopters to work.
Right.
But I won't go there. So that was one of the things I carry. And yes, we did have glint tape in them. The glint tape was because we were working with the Spectre gunships.
Yep.
And if we were on the ground and we lost communication or they needed to know where we were, they had their infrared beacon, and the watch cap, you could reverse the watch cap, and by shining the infrared beacon, he could tell who the friendlies were.
Two questions about that
Yes.
have come up. So one had to do with the size. So in my time in special operations, they always told us never more than an inch square, because the sensors were so sensitive that bigger wasn't better. But I noticed that you guys had a big one. So is that an artifact of the sensing capability?
It was an artifact of the roll that came off of. The roll was that big, so you cut a square off.
So just like a demo, P for plenty, basically.
Yeah, we cut it off, and I'm not sure what the sensors were like back then in 1980.
Yeah,
I'm assuming the sensors are a whole lot better now than they were, 41 years ago.
Now, second question about that is, was that primarily for if you guys were in an evasion mode, or was it to deconflict where you were when you were moving in on the embassy?
Should we need to have Spectre support? Because Spectre was, when this went down, Spectre was supposed to be over the top of the embassy.
Right.
And they, in addition to our support staff who was facing outward, were going to keep any reaction force away.
Right.
And it was to help identify us from anybody else running around out there, because you had
IFF on target.
Yeah, you did have a lot of the Revolutionary Guard at the time wearing old field jackets. So if you were running around with dark hair and long hair, now I was blonde at the time, but if you were running around in a field jacket and a pair of Levi's, a lot of the Revolutionary Guards, that was like their dress uniform all the time and running around. In my jacket, I also carried a spare, I probably had two of them, battery for my PVS 5s. Those were extra batteries in case the batteries went down. In your previous video, you had some gloves that were dyed black. Some of the guys had those gloves. They were kind of hard to come by at the time. We were actually using early on golf gloves. And what would happen, I liked the golf gloves better. We would buy them at Fort Bragg PX, and we would dye or paint them or do whatever. You can see some of the dyes wearing off on these. And we would wear them until they actually, you wore out the fingers.
Yeah.
And I actually had a pair of these when we went to Iran. After they wore out, we would cut the fingers off and go fingerless with them.
Yep.
And continue to use them to protect your hands and your palms and that sort of thing. But that's one of the gloves I had. The other glove has been misplaced somewhere.
It's funny because things didn't change much for a while. Because when I came in the late 80s and through the early 90s, we would go because batting gloves had a really good fit, and they started getting the sticky grips on the batting gloves, which were fantastic for working around the water or shooting in the rain.
This happens to be the wires that you see here look like just a couple of jumper wires. Each team had a hot wire kit in case we needed to escape and evade, E&E. And what we did on our team was everybody picked a different vehicle that, you know, instead of one guy trying to memorize 5 or 10 vehicles that he could hotwire and remember everything about them, one guy picked one vehicle and he became kind of the specialist in that. Mine was Toyota, and that was part of my hotwire kit for getting into Toyota should we need to get a hold of a Toyota and get out of Dodge.
That's awesome.
So that was in there. The hose clamps. These hose clamps were also used in conjunction with 2 pieces of balsa wood. They went under the suppressed barrel of my grease gun, an M3A1, the one without the cocking handle that cocks by pulling the bolt backwards on the inside. And I had a big streamlight. We didn't have any small lights back then. I had a big streamlight mounted underneath. I also carried a spare battery pack for that. But by adjusting the screws on the screw mount, you could adjust that, but instead of using white light, I could use white light if I needed to, but primarily it was infrared light with my PVS 5s, because we had an improvised, you couldn't buy them then, infrared filters.
Right.
So we had an infrared that we actually made.
You said you made your own.
Yeah, we found, Kodak produced a film. Kodak actually produced a film that was real brittle that you would cut out, and so it wouldn't crack because it was brittle. We would take little pieces of 100-mile-an-hour tape and actually do the edges of those. And I'm sorry I don't have it here, but I do have it.
So we've gotten a couple questions about, you and I were talking about your setup with the grease gun and how impressed you were, how accurate it was at night. Can you go through that in a little bit more detail? And there were questions that were asked about how did you toggle the light on? Did you use the switch that was on the light, or was there a tape switch? And how did you toggle the laser on? If you could kind of go through the systems. That's actually, I was pretty impressed. It was a pretty complex system that you had, particularly for its time.
Yeah, well, the streamlight underneath had a slide switch and a temporary switch. So by putting my hand forward on there, I could take my finger and press up, which would give me temporary light, as long as my finger was pressed in there. If I needed it on for a long time, I could actually slide it. So I had it mounted under the gun, so that switch on the streamlight was down there. It was probably half an inch wide and an inch long, and if you pressed on it, the light would come on. If you slid it on, it would come on. So that's how we operated that infrared light.
And you were saying that you used balsa wood as the interface between the body of the streamlight and the body of the suppressor.
Yes.
And then you use the hose clamp and you would compress against the balsa and aim it, kind of, right?
Actually, you could get it to where, you know, by adjusting back and forth in the tension on the hose clamps, you could adjust the light so you were kind of where you needed the light to be.
So organically, the weapon was a suppressed weapon system, 45 caliber, 45 ACP. You had some special ammunition you might want to talk about at the...
Well, no, we were just using ball ammunition on that.
Okay.
One. Yeah,
right,
we were
on.
just using 45 ball, which is subsonic normally because it's a 832 feet per second, so it's subsonic to start with. The only modification most of us made on the inside of it was where the bolt comes back and slams forward and slams all the way forward. We got some inner tube and cut it in the same shape as, and we made buffers. As you know,
Buffers.
you know now, you can buy
Shock buffs.
shock buffs for different guns. But back then there weren't any, so we got an old piece of inner tube. And we took scissors and cut it out and hole punched that and put it on the back and the slide, so that bolt would quiet down a little bit, going back and forth on the suppressed weapon. So that's the only modification on the inside.
So you had a that's pretty cool. So you have an organically suppressed, integrally suppressed weapon system with modified shock buff that you guys did. Then you added primarily IR, but could change it to white light.
Yes.
And you said you had about 20 minutes run time?
On the battery, continuous. Yeah, it didn't give you a whole lot of run time on, because it only had one power, high beam.
So primarily the IR filter was to illuminate an area, and then looking at it under your PVS 5s.
Yes.
But to do the aiming, then can you describe the laser system that you use?
Yes. Well, the other thing, let me back up because you mentioned aiming. For the pistols with the PVS 5 and even some of the other guns, what I ended up doing is I took one lens and focused it for infinity. And I took the other lens and focused it about where my sight was. That way I had some depth of field. Yeah, it's real hard to get. I had a little bit of depth of field. But what happened when we were in isolation preparing for the mission, I was given a XM PAQ4, an experimental model of the PAQ4, which later became, and it was an infrared aiming dot that blinked. And it also took those same batteries.
Now you said that thing had the mount was supposed to interface with the hole on a standard M16 carrying.
Yeah, on the carrying handle, there's a slot there, and there's a hole in, and it would fit right in there. It was designed to go right in there, and then the screw went right through. So I'm trying to figure out, and I found out on the trigger housing down below on the right-hand side how to mount that on my grease gun, my grease gun. And later on, after we got back, our armor looked at it, and we got some more PAQ4s in, and more grease guns were modified, but they were able to drill it, and I didn't have the ability to do that at that time.
That's awesome. Wow. And I imagine that was a pretty front-heavy gun.
Yeah, it was.
All right.
One last thing. We started with a picture of the boots, and we had the boots. These are insulated boots. I actually bought them at Kmart. They're Western Steer brand. Of course, Kmart doesn't exist anymore. And again, they have worn off, but they were all dyed black for that, because I wanted something to keep my feet warm. And inside the boots, we just used OD wool socks. And but those were the boots I actually used on the mission and continue to use until we were finally issued some assault boots, because there weren't assault boots. The stuff that you have today available just plain did not exist back then. So we had to improvise and make do.
The tread pattern's kind of interesting too as well.
Just a kind of a waffle.
Yeah. All right, Phil. Once again, your generosity in volunteering to show these are precious National Archives as far as I'm concerned. Anybody that has an interest in special operations equipment is. Well, I hope you enjoyed going through all of this equipment, walking a mile in the boots of someone who lived it, hearing exactly what the stuff was for. We just had a great time, and we're so thankful for Phil and his wife to graciously open up their home to us and to go through all of this equipment, take the time to share it with everyone. Phil, I want to thank you personally. It's just been great, and invite you out to Whiskey and War Stories. If you and your wife can make it, we would love to see y'all out there. It's going to be August 21st at the Scottsdale Resort at McCormick Ranch. August 21st, 2021, Whiskey and War Stories, Operation Eagle Claw.